everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you part 2 of my top 10 series. This is not me dividing my top 10 into 2 separate videos and giving you 5 in each one. I'm not that cruel, but I did do my top 10 non-fantasy series in the previous video, which I will leave linked in case you want to check it out. But essentially, because I read mostly fantasy, I did feel compelled to do a separate non-fantasy one, so I could actually talk about something that isn't fantasy for 5 seconds. Go check that out if you want to know my top 10 series that are not in my most commonly read genre. I did have one honorable mention in the previous one. However, I don't have any in this one because this is my genre. This is the genre that I read. Honorable mentions would just go on for hours. There are so many series that I really love that I wish were on this list, but I am not going to do that because otherwise it might well be a top 20 list. So we can stick to the top 10 and we're going to go through them today. Starting off with number 10, we have the Winter Night series by Catherine Arden. This one is an adult epic fantasy that is historical fantasy. In my personal opinion, the Winter Night series revolutionized historical fantasy. I don't think historical fantasy would be where it is today if it weren't for this series. And this one is following a young woman named Vasilisa, who is living in a small town in Russia. In this town, people still adhere to some old customs. So even though it is during the Christianization of Russia, we still have people who, though they attend church and still adhere to Christian customs, also have retained some of their heritage by still adhering to pagan customs. Things like leaving bread out for the domovai, etc. So when Vasilisa's father, who is kind of like the lord of this town, has remarried to an incredibly Christian woman who brings with her a priest who wants to knock out any remnants of paganism left within the country, they actually begin to face hardships due to the fact that they are no longer leaving out tribute for the domovai and these gods that are helping them, and therefore have also weakened their power, who was actually holding back a much more evil force. This is a series that has a touch of romance to it, a lot of history to it, and a lot of fantastical elements. It's also divine or deity magic along with the domovai, who are kind of like the fair folk almost, and it's absolutely gorgeous and it's written in this beautiful lyrical way, and I cannot recommend the series enough. It's super hyped and it deserves every single drop of hype that it has. Coming in at number 9, I have the Hanged God series by Tilda Holt. This is one that is mythology / historical fiction. We do have Norse gods feature in this series, and we do also have it set in a historical Scandinavia. So it's both historical and mythological, and it is following multiple characters. We are following a young man who is the son of a chieftain and is going to have to one day inherit this position, and it's him learning how to become the person that he is supposed to be. We are following a young woman who survives a terrible event and therefore accidentally unleashes a monster, and we are following a older woman who has been hiding her identity for a long part of her life, but she once again must take up her mantle. And it is an absolutely captivating series when it comes to the way it describes the world, the way that the convergence between the mythological realms and our history are there. It discusses things like Christianization as well, so a theme a bit going on here, but it discusses Christianization and the interactions with the Christian world from the Norse world. We also have things like wars, raids, all of the things that you would hope from Viking fantasy are in here. Most of the fantastical elements are from the divine and or mythological elements, so it's not like people just randomly wielding magic, but it is epic fantasy in every sense of the word, but it just also happens to have mythology and history woven in. Coming in at number 8, I have the Empire of Dust series by Anna Smith Spark. I love Anna Smith Spark's writing. It's just the right side of being a little bit literary while also still feeling super epic. I love her writing in this series. It's a grimdark trilogy that centers around this world where you have at its epicenter a capital capital city that runs everything, that runs all of the neighboring kingdoms. And it used to be this holy city, this city of morality and of power, and now it has become corrupt and debaucherous. And we are following it from multiple perspectives. We are following it from a man who lives within the city, who despises where the city has become. We are following it from the perspective of two people that are part of this band of mercenaries who have been hired, and one of whom has been part of this band of mercenaries for a while and just wants to get the job done. The other who is a new member of this band of mercenaries who clearly has more skills than he should. And then finally we are following it from the perspective of a priestess who has actually never left the city and never left the confines of her temple, yet she is supposed to be providing solace for people whose lives she does not understand. I just think that the way that Anna Smith Spark writes people, writes conflict, and writes the way that society fails its people more often than not in this grim, dark, but beautifully dark way is absolutely stunning. It's such a compelling story, even though there are times where there's not much going on. You're just along for the ride. Like, I just let it take me, and I really appreciated that about this series. Coming in at number 7, I have the Buckley trilogy by C.M. Curley. This is a self-pub epic fantasy series. It is somewhat grimdark and it is very harrowing, but absolutely gorgeous. It's very character-centric. At the beginning of the story, we're following two brothers. They are in this village in a world where if you're a magic user, you will essentially get taken so that you can be trained in this magic. When this person shows up to go and test the children of this village to see if they have magical abilities, something goes terribly wrong and then both brothers are forced to flee. They have been living since then in this other town, but they are beginning to draw suspicion because it is a small town and whenever an incident occurs, they are nearby. So they have decided that what they're going to do is they're going to uproot to the capital, where it's such a big place that they will be able to hide with better ease and would be able to blend in with society. However, on their journey, they in fact attract the attention of a prince who is looking for them as they are part of a prophecy. All of this on the backdrop of this kingdom that is attempting to overtake this land. It's got so much going on. It's incredibly political. It has so many amazing elements of fantasy. The way the magic works, the toll it takes on the characters is absolutely incredible. It's not got any magic for the sake of ease. In any case, it's almost a burden. The way that it describes the setting, the way that the characters interact with each other, it just had so many things that I loved, and it's such an underhyped series, and I need more people to be reading this series. Coming in at number 6, I have one that is not underhyped, and that is the David Bad trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty. This is another historical fantasy series in which we are following a young woman named Nari who lives in Cairo, and she has actually got the magical ability to be able to heal people. However, instead of using that for good, she's actually a con woman. So she will have her customers come in and they will tell her all of their ailments, and then she will diagnose them with this absolutely deadly illness, except if they go to the apothecary and do this specific thing. They then go spend a load of money at the apothecary so that they might heal themselves, and then her and the apothecary split the proceeds. However, one day when she is doing one of her rituals, which happens to be a con, she accidentally summons a djinn who realizes she should not have these magical abilities and decides to take her to the magical city of Davidbad. Once there, she gets embroiled in the politics and the social aspects of that society. It's a very, very interesting series, the way that it starts out seeming like it's just going to be this fantasy adventure, possibly romance, and then it ends up turning into so much more. I never expected the level of politics that we would be seeing from this series, I'm not gonna lie, and I just really appreciate the world building, but most importantly the social discussions that happen in here. The themes of this series, as they evolve throughout the series as well, they just get better and better, and overall it's just a fantastically easy reading, compulsively readable, but deep and meaningful series. Coming in at number 5, we have The Memoirs of Lady Trent by Marie Brennan. I love this series so much. This is the story of Isabella Camphurst, Lady Trent. Since she was a young lady, she has had a fascination with science and dragons. However, in her society, which is somewhat a pseudo-regency / Victorian society, she is not permitted to do so. However, she manages to worm her way onto an expedition, and it goes from there. And it's how she eventually becomes the foremost respected scientist and dragonologist. And this is an absolutely incredible series. It is told in the form of memoirs from Lady Trent herself, where she is like a tell-all. She will divulge and discuss everything that went on, from the personal involvement in her life to the scientific discoveries and everything in between. We have a different setting in each book, and the way it discusses things like colonialism, racism, the way it discusses prejudices on other people's customs, societies, etc. Fantastic. We have tons of representation, from gender fluidity to queer representation, obviously POC characters. I also just really love the discussions around different cultures, faiths and customs that I think were discussed really well in here. Obviously, it's a story about a woman coming into her own, and it is about her defying social norms when it comes to what was expected of women during this time. We have discussions around motherhood. We have discussions around the ethics of investigation and documentation. So many things. It is light academia, but with very, very intense themes, written in a way that makes it digestible. And just everything about this series is absolutely incredible. The fantasy elements are, 1, it's not our world, and 2, it has dragons. There's no actual outright magic really in it. The way that the societies are depicted and the discussions that you could have around this series are absolutely impeccable. Coming in at number 4, we have another very hyped series, and we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This one is a grim, dark military fantasy in which we are following a young woman named Rin, who is from a small town in one of the poorer provinces of this fantasy version of China. So she has a darker complexion and no money, and she lives in a society where you can take this very, very difficult and very prestigious exam, and if you are to pass it, you will be granted access to one of the universities. So she decides that she does not want the life that she has ended up with, and she definitely does not want to marry the person that her foster family have decided that she will marry. Therefore, instead, she decides that she's going to take fate into her own hands and apply to the exam. So when she does pass with a good score, she ends up getting accepted into the only academy that is free, which is the military academy. While she is there, she still experiences racism and colorism, I suppose, from her peers, which means that she has not really escaped life the way that she thought she would. However, she begins to uncover some of her innate powers that she has that she did not know she had. And it kind of goes from there, and it's about discussing the realities of war versus the theory of war. So you have the first half of this first book where she is in a military academy learning about war, versus when war actually breaks out and how unprepared they all are for it. Overall, you are following a very, very impetuous character, someone who is very headstrong and very hot-headed, which means that they make some questionable decisions, but ones that are definitely ones that you can see this character making. But we're talking about someone who has an immense amount of power. So we're seeing a lot of things discussed within this series, especially around things like who decides the fate of the world and who has power. The further we get into the series, we also have discussions around things like colonialism and the involvement of the West in the affairs of the East. And overall, just a really, really, really amazing series. It is difficult to read. One of the most difficult scenes I have ever read in a fantasy series is in this book. So do bear that in mind. It is very harrowing. It's not an easy read. And when I say dark, it is dark. But for me personally, if you can handle the topics, it is really worth it, because it's not doing it for shock value, it's doing it to discuss things. Coming in at number 3, we have the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Another one whose themes I love, whose characters I love. I think that one of the things that I really love about N.K. Jemisin is that she writes characters that oftentimes would be considered other. So you have, for example, Essen, one of our protagonists, very much is set up the same way as a lot of male video game characters are set up, but from the perspective of a Black woman. And there are just so many things like that that I think are really, really intelligently done. The way that she plays with archetypes and stereotypes, the way she plays with the character trope setup and places them on other people so that you're getting it from a new angle, all while in this really innovative world with very innovative societies, with an interesting magic system, and obviously, as I said, incredible themes. This is the story of a woman who lives in a society where having some magical abilities are not well received, because in this world every 200 years or so you get a fifth season, which is total devastation. It's hurricanes, it's floods, it's earthquakes, it's world-ending level apocalypse. So people who can control the weather and can control things like earthquakes and have these magical abilities that seem connected to the seasons are despised instead of revered. Therefore, when it is discovered that her child has these powers, her husband kills her son and then flees with her daughter. So now she is on a mission to go retrieve her daughter from the clutches of her husband. We also get other perspectives, but I don't want to say too much because this is a book that it's best to not know really anything going in. The blinder you are, the better the experience from what I've found. So for the most part, I just think that if you are wanting a series that has really strong themes, that has really interesting world building and some incredibly innovative character work, I would highly recommend. Coming in at number 2, we have The Chronicles of the Bitch Queen by K.S. Veloso. This is an epic fantasy trilogy in which we are following a young woman named Talion. Now, Talion is the daughter of a war chief, and on the day of her wedding her husband fled the marriage and she has not seen him since. Therefore, she and her son have now been running the kingdom. However, when discourse starts beginning to happen around her and her kid, she needs to go and find her husband and bring him back so that the purpose of their marriage of creating a more peaceful and stable society can actually be brought into fruition. This is such an epic series. It has so many different things happen from that intro all the way through to the end. It's got some of the most innovative and interesting characters I've read. I really love that we have Talion being this incredibly messy protagonist, but not in a way that angers you like Rin, and not in a way that just instantly garners you respect like with Essen. It's more, you have this person who is just a human being who is also placed in this position of power in this world that is very dangerous, and I really love that. And I love the way that K.S. Veloso writes mothers and the aspect of motherhood. I just think that it's one of my favorite elements in this series because it's not something that we see very often throughout fantasy, to see a mother in this protagonist role throughout this epic fantasy storyline. So I love this series so much. I am working my way through everything that K.S. Veloso has written because of it, and I would highly, highly recommend checking it out. And coming in at number 1, surprising no one, is Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. Realm of the Elderlings is an epic fantasy series that is comprised of multiple series. We have 3 Fitz series, and then intermittently we have 2 other series that are set in a different part of the world. The first book surrounds a boy named Fitz, who is the illegitimate son of the king in waiting, so the crown prince, and therefore the crown prince, when he discovers of Fitz's existence, abdicates the throne, and it leaves the kingdom in a bit of a limbo for a while. He then grows up in the capital. He is raised by the stable master and then begins to be trained as an assassin for the crown. It goes a bit further than that, you might think, 16 books later, but that's his starting point. But it's an epic fantasy series that surrounds a lot of the politics of the world. It has a lot to do with the different magic systems of the world. Fitz actually has the ability to adhere to both magic systems. So we have one magic system that is basically only taught within the royal line, which is the skill, and it is revered and lauded, and he also has the ability of the witch, which is deemed like dirty magic because it is animal magic. And so we have so many different elements going on in this world when it comes to the magic and the politics, to the point where, again, in other series, we are moving to other parts of the world. We're seeing the world open up. It incorporates a new layer, a new element throughout the entire series. It doesn't just stagnate at any point. Another thing that I really love about this series is that you also get an awful lot of the histories woven in. It's a way to discuss the fact that history would repeat itself, or a way to discuss the fact that because this happened historically, now people behave this way. The fact that history has a knock-on effect on society. And I really appreciated the way that Robin Hobb took the time to do that. So overall, absolutely incredible series. Love it. I have nothing more to say. And there you have it. Those are my top 10 fantasy series of all time, or at least that I've read so far. All time sounds kind of depressing. I hope that there are more that I can add to this list. But for now, that's where I'm at. So thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know if you have read any of these and your thoughts on them, or if I have convinced you to read any of them with this video. But that's all for me for today. So I hope to catch you in another one soon.